Greetings everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm your host Wayne Sales, and today we're talking about a new superhero movie coming out next month, that's in August, called The Blue Beetle. So the Blue Beetle is actually three different characters all in one. The very first one was a fellow named Dan Garrett, who was a police officer. And then we had later, it moved on to Ted Cord, who was an industrialist, a wealthy and brilliant inventor. And then eventually it ended up with a young man by the name of Jaime Reyes, who was a teenager who came across the powers of the Blue Beetle. So just so you have an idea of what's going on, let's start from the very beginning. With Dan Garrett. Dan Garrett was a police officer who, did his job, taking care of the criminals and so on. And if I understand correctly, his origin was retconned to where he was an archaeologist, and he comes across the scarab. And the scarab is the little pennant that he had and actually gave him super strength and the ability to fly. He could somewhat invulnerable, could fight off bullets and so on. And he destroyed a lot of enemies that way. He took care of the bad guys, as well as being a cop in between that. So, and that's just a condensed version. Believe me, it gets more intense. But moving on, later, Dan Garrett was killed, and eventually the role went to Ted Cord, the inventor. Dan Garrett happened to be Ted's mentor before he passed, and he evidently passed that information on and the scarab on to Ted Cord. Now, the interesting thing about it, Ted was a physical athlete, very good, well-trained fighter, and he relied more on his inventions, sort of like Batman, maybe not quite as buffed as Batman is, but he was pretty good at it, at the fighting, and his inventions were pretty much first rate. So he created a vehicle that he moved around in called the Bug, and he used that to fly around, and he could suspend himself from the Bug by way of a cable, and he would dive down into a bunch of people and would be fighting them off, and then if it got too thick, he could use that to pull him out of the crowd. He also had one of his major inventions was something he called a BB gun, which was a flashlight sort of gun, but yet it would hypnotize his opponents. So basically, when he shot them in the face with it, it didn't do any physical damage to them, but they would be totally out of it, and then he'd go ahead and punch them out, and that'd be the end of that. So Ted took on that role for some period of time. He was a member of the Justice League and other groups, and through a series of events became quite the hero in his own right. And then, excuse me, unfortunately Ted was actually murdered by a fellow named Maxwell Lord, and so the Justice League was definitely out to get this guy for that. But then somewhere down the road it ends up, as it transferred again, the scarab ends up in a young teenager's hands by the name of Jaime Reyes. And the young man actually, this time the scarab embedded itself on the back of his spine, and when it did that, it became well connected with him and gave him serious powers that he could pretty much, almost like a Green Lantern in a sense, where if he could think it, it could create it. So he was quite the force and did a stint with the Young Justice, and I believe he's helped many of the other heroes and maybe even the Justice League as well. But that is the current state, is that the current Blue Beetle is Jaime Reyes, and just to find out his take on it, I think the movie's going to probably try to dip a little bit into all three of the characters and kind of make it solidify it with one, which would be Jaime. So this could be interesting because there's such a huge story with this scarab. There's so much more having to do with aliens and invasions and so on. But again, because of the way the origin has been shifted so many times, it's kind of hard to keep up. But bottom line, the only thing you need to know is that originally Dan Garrett was the Blue Beetle. Second came Ted Cord. Then came Jaime Reyes, who is the current one. So he's a young man. And through all that experience, Blue Beetle was probably one of the most powerful guys out there. I mean, the fact that a scarab allows him to create stuff at will, just whatever he can come up with. So there you have it. I mean, by no means is that the most thorough introduction you ever heard in your life, but it will get you started. You'll have some knowledge of what's going on with the guy. And then we watch the movie, we get to find out the other details, how far they bring that up. So I look forward to seeing it. It's going to be a little interesting, a little different, but we'll see. So you'll know, Blue Beetle, check it out next month in August, and we'll see what happens. So remember, you heard it here first, or maybe not first, but at least you heard it here. So feel free to check it out. Let me know what you think. And if you want to make a comment on it, that's fine. Feel free to do so. Thank you again. And this is Wayne. Remember, Blue Beetle's coming, so get ready. We'll see you next time.